July 6, 1944. The humid morning air of Saipan hangs thick over the jagged ridges and volcanic plains of the island, a suffocating blanket that clings to every man, every weapon, every heartbeat. The distant roar of artillery echoes from the northern beaches, a constant reminder that this island, small yet strategically vital, is the focus of one of the Pacific War's bloodiest campaigns. You feel it immediately, the tension in the air, the smell of wet earth and salt, mingled with the faint tang of gunpowder. From the American side, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, alongside elements of the U.S. Army, have been clawing their way inland for over a week. They are exhausted, their uniforms plastered with sweat and grime, faces streaked with the dirt of relentless combat. Lieutenant Colonel Robert "Bob" Harrington of the 2nd Marine squints over the rocky ridge, binoculars pressed tight to his face. Ahead, Japanese fortifications rise like jagged teeth from the earth, camouflaged under palm fronds and boulders, waiting silently for the approaching Americans. Across the battlefield, the Japanese 43rd Division, battle-hardened yet starving, clings stubbornly to every hill and trench. Captain Hiroshi Tanaka peers from a slit trench, eyes scanning the horizon for the familiar shapes of American soldiers. He can smell them, the metallic tang of fear and sweat carried on the humid wind. His men, roughly 3,000 in number, are weary but resolute, their rifles slung across shoulders, bayonets gleaming, every sense attuned to the next strike. The day begins quietly, almost deceptively so. A low hum of distant aircraft, the occasional pop of sniper fire. Then, a subtle shift in the American lines. Marines slowly begin to fall back from the forward ridges, carefully, deliberately, as if withdrawing under pressure. To the Japanese, it appears as though the Americans are faltering, as if exhaustion has finally cracked their resolve. Murmurs ripple through Tanaka's men, a rare surge of hope. They tighten grips on rifles and grenades, and with a battle cry that cuts through the heat, they charge forward, eager to reclaim ground they believe has been abandoned. But this is no ordinary maneuver. Every step the Japanese take is a step into a trap meticulously laid over weeks. Artillery observers, perched behind concealed ridges, signal coordinates with urgent precision. Machine gun nests, camouflaged under the island's sparse vegetation, swivel in perfect unison. Navy ships offshore, their guns calibrated for pinpoint strikes, wait silently for the signal. The stage is set for one of the most devastating 18 minutes in the history of the Pacific Theater. The wind shifts. The sun glints off Tanaka's rifle as he advances, and in that brief glimmer, the world seems suspended in an instant of quiet before chaos erupts. The Japanese soldiers are unaware that the very ground beneath them has been mapped into a death trap. And when the first American shells scream down from the ridges, when the coordinated fire from machine guns and naval guns tears through the advancing regiment, there will be no mercy, no retreat, only the harsh calculus of war. In those moments, the men on both sides are alive in ways that are almost unbearable to witness. Every heartbeat is a countdown, every breath a risk. And in just 18 minutes, the terrain of Saipan will bear witness to an unimaginable toll, 2,800 men, nearly an entire regiment, wiped from the battlefield, their screams mingling with the roar of guns and the acrid smoke of artillery. July 6, 1944, 0905 hours. The American lines have seemingly receded further, leaving behind abandoned foxholes and flattened patches of scorched earth. Dust rises in the heat haze, dancing across the shattered landscape. From the vantage point of Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, every movement of the Japanese regiment is now visible, each man a living target unknowingly marching into annihilation. Captain Tanaka rallies his men, shouting orders over the din of distant gunfire. Push forward. The Americans are weak. The soldiers surge ahead, bayonets at the ready, adrenaline flooding their veins. Their boots pound against the volcanic soil, a steady rhythm that will soon be drowned by the thunder of American fire. And then, almost imperceptibly, the first American shells arc over the ridges. Artillery observers, perched like hawks, have calculated the distances with near-perfect precision. The first salvo lands just ahead of the Japanese line, kicking up soil, shrapnel, and panic. The advancing soldiers stumble, turning instinctively toward the source of the explosion, only to find machine gun fire ripping through their flanks. The air fills with the unmistakable whine of bullets, the crack of rifles, the deafening roar of artillery. Harrington's men, positioned in camouflaged bunkers and behind rocky outcrops, open fire with deadly efficiency. Corporal James O'Reilly sweeps his Browning M1919 across the slope, picking off soldiers as they attempt to scatter. Each burst is calculated, trained for maximum effect, and in minutes, the once confident Japanese advance begins to crumble. Soldiers dive for cover, some frozen in shock, others trying desperately to drag wounded comrades from the line of fire. Offshore, the destroyers' guns unleash a relentless barrage. The concussive blasts shake the earth, hurling debris into the air. From Tanaka's perspective, it is chaos incarnate. He shouts orders, tries to regroup his men, but the discipline that had carried them through months of brutal island combat begins to disintegrate. Panic spreads like wildfire. The fake retreat has done its job. The Japanese soldiers had charged headlong into a trap they could never have anticipated. Time stretches and collapses simultaneously. 18 minutes feel like an eternity for those caught in the storm. Every second carries the weight of mortality, every decision a brush with death. The landscape becomes a hellscape of smoke, fire, and blood. Machine gun nests swivel seamlessly, artillery coordinates adjust dynamically, and naval gunners correct their aim with terrifying accuracy. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it ends. By 09:23 hours, the field lies silent, save for the wind carrying the faint cries of the wounded. 2,800 men have been annihilated. Entire platoons and companies no longer exist. The fake retreat at Saipan has demonstrated the lethal precision and psychological cunning of the American forces, leaving behind a scar on the island that would mark the turning point of the battle. Amid the carnage, Lieutenant Colonel Harrington surveys the field. The toll is staggering, even for seasoned soldiers. He knows the victory was tactical genius, but the human cost weighs heavily. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Japanese regiment scatter, disoriented and demoralized, their hopes of turning the tide on Saipan shattered irreparably. The island itself seems to breathe, smoke rising from the cratered earth, a testament to one of the most brutal, calculated ambushes in Pacific War history. By late afternoon on July 6, 1944, the air over Saipan is heavy with the acrid scent of gunpowder, scorched earth, and blood. The landscape is littered with the remnants of what had been a proud Japanese regiment. Bodies lie where they fell, rifles still clutched in rigid hands, bayonets embedded in the mud and rocks, uniforms shredded by artillery and machine gun fire. For the survivors, the battlefield is a waking nightmare, the cries of the wounded and dying echoing across the island, mingling with the distant thrum of naval guns still pounding fortified positions. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington walks among his men, inspecting the aftermath. His face is a mixture of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. The strategy had worked flawlessly. American tactical precision, combined with psychological deception, had produced an almost unbelievable result: 2,800 enemy soldiers eradicated in a mere 18 minutes. Yet the toll weighs on him. War, no matter how skillfully executed, always leaves its mark on the living. Across the field, Captain Tanaka surveys the remnants of his command. Hundreds of soldiers are dead, thousands more wounded or captured. His regiment is effectively destroyed. His chest tightens as the reality sinks in: their desperate charge had been manipulated, funneled into a lethal corridor designed by the Americans. The few survivors scatter to regroup, carrying the memory of that moment when hope turned instantly into annihilation. For the broader campaign, the fake retreat has a ripple effect. The destruction of the 43rd Division significantly weakens Japanese defensive lines across Saipan. With morale shattered and manpower decimated, American forces find their subsequent advance faster, though still harrowing. The psychological impact on both sides is profound. The Japanese soldiers realize that every American movement may conceal a trap, and American commanders gain confidence in the power of tactical ingenuity. Amidst the chaos, medics and stretcher-bearers navigate the craters and blood-soaked terrain. They pull the wounded into makeshift aid stations, some barely clinging to life. The cries and moans of the injured fill the air, a somber reminder that every tactical victory carries human suffering. Yet, even in this grim reality, acts of heroism emerge. Corporal O'Reilly, ignoring the danger, drags a wounded comrade from the crossfire, embodying the courage and tenacity of the Marines in the Pacific theater. The island itself seems almost alive in its silence after the battle. Smoke rises from scorched bunkers, craters pockmark the landscape like scars, and the once thick jungle shows the brutal traces of modern warfare. Historians would later describe this as one of the most devastating ambushes in Pacific War history, a perfect storm of deception, firepower, and timing that left an indelible mark on Saipan. For the men who survived, memories of that 18-minute slaughter would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And for the commanders, the fake retreat stands as a testament to the deadly precision and calculated cunning that became a hallmark of American operations in the Pacific. The fake retreat at Saipan was not a mere stroke of luck, it was a carefully orchestrated masterpiece of military strategy, blending timing, terrain, and human psychology into a weapon as lethal as any artillery shell. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington and his staff had spent weeks studying Japanese defensive patterns, noting their aggressive tendencies and their willingness to seize the initiative whenever they sensed weakness. Every movement of the retreat was choreographed to exploit exactly that behavior. Artillery positions were mapped with precision, overlapping fields of fire ensuring that every advancing soldier would be caught in a deadly crossfire. Machine gun emplacements were concealed in the folds of the terrain, often barely distinguishable from the surrounding vegetation. Even the offshore naval guns were coordinated to fire at exact moments, their devastating barrages designed to cut off escape routes and drive Japanese troops deeper into the kill zone. From the perspective of the Japanese soldiers, the Americans were suddenly vulnerable, an irresistible opportunity for a counterattack after days of grueling combat. Tanaka's men charged with the ferocity born of desperation, completely unaware that each step forward carried them closer to annihilation. The psychological element of the deception was as crucial as the firepower itself. By manipulating the enemy's expectations, American commanders had turned aggression into a liability. This operation also revealed a subtle yet profound truth about warfare: perception can be as deadly as bullets. Soldiers make decisions in fractions of seconds based on the information available, often relying on instinct and prior experience. Harrington and his officers had engineered a situation where every instinct the Japanese regiment relied upon would lead them directly into a pre-planned kill zone. In essence, the Americans had weaponized trust and overconfidence. The success of the fake retreat had a ripple effect on the Pacific campaign. Other commanders studied the operation meticulously, noting how combining deception with overwhelming firepower could decisively shift the balance in an engagement. For the Japanese High Command, the destruction of the 43rd Division sent shockwaves. It demonstrated that even the most disciplined and determined units were vulnerable to well-planned American tactics. Yet, while the operation is often cited as a pinnacle of tactical brilliance, it also raises moral questions that echo through history. The deliberate orchestration of mass slaughter, the calculated manipulation of soldiers into walking into near-certain death, these are strategies that reflect both genius and the grim calculus of total war. For Harrington and his men, the victory was tactical, but the human cost was undeniable, a burden that would haunt them long after the guns fell silent. In military academies decades later, the fake retreat at Saipan would become a case study, illustrating how intelligence, terrain, firepower, and human psychology converge to produce a result that seems almost impossibly efficient. 18 minutes of orchestrated chaos left an indelible mark on history, proving that sometimes the deadliest weapon in war is not the gun or the shell, but the mind of a strategist who understands the enemy better than they understand themselves. Yet, while the operation is often cited as a pinnacle of tactical brilliance, it also raises moral questions that echo through history. The deliberate orchestration of mass slaughter, the calculated manipulation of soldiers into walking into near-certain death, these are strategies that reflect both genius and the grim calculus of total war. For Harrington and his men, the victory was tactical, but the human cost was undeniable, a burden that would haunt them long after the guns fell silent. In military academies decades later, the fake retreat at Saipan would become a case study, illustrating how intelligence, terrain, firepower, and human psychology converge to produce a result that seems almost impossibly efficient. 18 minutes of orchestrated chaos left an indelible mark on history, proving that sometimes the deadliest weapon in war is not the gun or the shell, but the mind of a strategist who understands the enemy better than they understand themselves. Among the thousands caught in the 18-minute maelstrom, a handful survived, scarred, dazed, and forever changed. Private First Class Kenji Sato, barely 20 years old, remembers the initial rush forward as exhilarating, a momentary surge of hope after weeks of starvation and exhaustion. "We thought the Americans were retreating," he later recalled, his voice trembling decades afterward. "We thought we could push them back and take the hill. But then, the sky fell." The sky falling was the symphony of destruction that Harrington's forces had orchestrated. Artillery shells screamed through the air, machine guns tore into flanks, and naval bombardments shattered the terrain. Sato's squad was decimated almost instantly. He dived into a shallow crater, covering his head with his arms, counting every heartbeat as if it were his last. By the time the smoke cleared, more than half his platoon was gone. "I don't remember the screams," he admitted later. "I only remember the silence afterward, the silence that followed the roar." On the American side, the psychological toll was equally profound. Corporal James O'Reilly, who had risked his life to drag wounded comrades from the line of fire, later described the scene as surreal, like stepping into another world where time moved too fast and death was everywhere. Many Marines who participated in the ambush spoke of a strange mixture of exhilaration and horror, a recognition of the sheer effectiveness of their tactics, tempered by the undeniable reality of human suffering. Even commanders reflected on the eerie precision of the massacre. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, decades later, recounted reviewing the battlefield and seeing the shattered remnants of a regiment that had once numbered 3,000. "It was like looking at a map of destruction," he said. "Everything we planned worked, and yet, every success came at a cost you could see in the faces of the men who survived." The survivors on both sides carried these memories into old age. For the Japanese soldiers, it was a lesson in the dangers of overconfidence, in the lethal power of deception, and in the fragility of human life when caught in a well-laid ambush. For the Americans, it was a testament to tactical brilliance, yes, but also a reminder that victory in war is inseparable from tragedy. Historians later pieced together accounts from both sides, analyzing the sequence of events, the coordination of artillery and naval fire, the machine gun placements, and the strategic manipulation of terrain. The consensus was clear: the fake retreat at Saipan was not only a turning point in the battle itself, but a harrowing example of how strategy and psychology could combine to create one of the most lethal 18-minute engagements in modern warfare. The destruction of the Japanese 43rd Division during those fateful 18 minutes had repercussions far beyond the immediate battlefield. With nearly an entire regiment obliterated, Japanese defenses on Saipan were critically weakened. Hills and ridges that had been fiercely contested for weeks now lay exposed, and American forces could exploit these vulnerabilities to advance deeper into the island's interior. The psychological shock to the remaining Japanese forces was equally significant. Soldiers who had survived the ambush moved cautiously, often hesitating at the first sign of American movement, unsure if another trap awaited them. Discipline and cohesion, hallmarks of Japanese military doctrine, began to fracture. Officers like Captain Tanaka struggled to rally their men, but fear and disbelief had already taken root. The inability to recover from such a catastrophic loss in personnel and morale accelerated the collapse of organized resistance across Saipan. For American commanders, the fake retreat validated a principle that would guide Pacific operations for the remainder of the war: deception, combined with precise coordination of firepower, could yield disproportionate results. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington's meticulous planning and execution became a case study in operational ingenuity. From artillery observers to machine gun crews, every element worked in perfect synchrony, highlighting the importance of training, timing, and situational awareness in modern warfare. Moreover, the ambush underscored the emerging dominance of combined arms tactics. Land-based artillery, infantry fire, and naval gunfire all contributed to a single, cohesive operation. Such coordination was revolutionary for the Pacific theater, where geography often limited the effectiveness of traditional battlefield maneuvers. Saipan became a template for subsequent assaults on heavily fortified islands, emphasizing the value of psychological warfare, deception, and precision strikes. The broader impact on the war cannot be overstated. Saipan's fall paved the way for the American advance toward the Mariana Islands, providing a critical base from which strategic bombing campaigns against the Japanese home islands could be launched. The annihilation of the 43rd Division was not merely a tactical victory, it was a strategic blow that hastened the erosion of Japanese defensive capability across the Pacific. Yet the human cost remained a haunting legacy. For every tactical success, there were lives extinguished in an instant. The 18-minute battle had demonstrated the efficiency of American military planning, but it also offered a sobering reminder of the brutal calculus of war. The ground of Saipan would forever bear the scars of that operation, and the survivors, on both sides, would carry the memory of the carnage for the rest of their lives. The 18-minute annihilation of 2,800 Japanese soldiers at Saipan offers more than a story of battlefield carnage, it provides enduring lessons in strategy, human psychology, and the nature of modern warfare. Military historians often highlight the fake retreat as a textbook example of how perception, timing, and terrain can be leveraged to achieve overwhelming results with limited risk to one's own forces. At its core, the operation exploited a universal truth: in the chaos of battle, soldiers act on instinct and assumption. The Japanese troops believed the Americans were retreating out of weakness, and that belief became their undoing. By crafting a scenario that appeared vulnerable, American commanders turned aggression into liability. This manipulation of enemy expectations exemplifies the lethal potential of psychological warfare, long before the term became a formalized doctrine. From a tactical standpoint, the fake retreat also illustrates the critical importance of coordination. Artillery, infantry, and naval forces functioned as a single entity, each element anticipating and complementing the others. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington's meticulous planning ensured that no step of the Japanese advance went unpunished. The battle was a symphony of destruction, each weapon a note in a carefully orchestrated composition of death. Yet beyond strategy and precision, the battle underscores a harsh reality: war is measured not just in victories, but in human cost. For the Americans, the operation was a triumph of skill and discipline. For the Japanese, it was a catastrophe, a stark demonstration of vulnerability even among the most disciplined troops. The aftermath left survivors traumatized, commanders haunted, and the battlefield marked indelibly by the dead. The fake retreat at Saipan also shaped future Pacific campaigns. Commanders studying the engagement recognized the power of deception, the necessity of reconnaissance, and the advantages conferred by superior firepower when applied with precision. In the months that followed, similar tactics were employed during assaults on islands like Tinian and Iwo Jima, proving that the lessons learned in those 18 minutes reverberated far beyond the volcanic ridges of Saipan. Finally, the battle serves as a timeless reminder of the duality of warfare: brilliance and horror intertwined. Every calculated maneuver, every strategically placed artillery shell, every burst of machine gun fire carried consequences that extended far beyond the battlefield. The fake retreat was a triumph of human ingenuity, but also a sobering testament to the fragility of life when caught in the grip of war. As the smoke cleared over Saipan, the island itself bore witness to a turning point in the Pacific War. The fake retreat had not only decimated the Japanese 43rd Division but had also cemented a tactical philosophy that would define the remainder of the campaign: the effective combination of deception, firepower, and psychological manipulation. In the years following the battle, military academies around the world studied the engagement meticulously. The operation became a case study in how smaller, disciplined forces could leverage intelligence, terrain, and anticipation of enemy behavior to achieve catastrophic results. American strategists praised the execution as a model of efficiency, coordination, and timing. Yet alongside these accolades, there was an unspoken recognition of the immense human toll that such precision required. For the men who survived, Saipan was unforgettable. Veterans of the battle carried memories that could not be erased: the sudden chaos of artillery, the screams of comrades, the surreal intensity of 18 minutes that felt like eternity. Japanese survivors bore their own burdens: grief, shame, and the haunting knowledge that a momentary decision to trust instinct had led to near-total annihilation. These stories, passed down through memoirs and interviews, offer a human dimension to a battle often studied for its strategic brilliance alone. The battle also shaped public perception of the Pacific Theater. News of the heavy casualties at Saipan, coupled with stories of American tactical ingenuity, underscored both the ferocity of Japanese resistance and the escalating sophistication of Allied operations. While the general public might never know the full extent of the calculated deception, historians and military analysts recognized its profound impact on the trajectory of the war. In the broader scope of World War II, the fake retreat at Saipan represented more than a single tactical victory. It was a demonstration of how warfare had evolved. The precision and coordination required for such an operation foreshadowed the modern emphasis on combined arms, intelligence-driven planning, and psychological manipulation as force multipliers. It showed that battles could be won not only through brute force but through cunning, observation, and timing. Today, the ridges and valleys of Saipan remain scarred by the violence of July 6, 1944. Monuments and plaques commemorate the lives lost, both American and Japanese. The story of the 18-minute massacre serves as a reminder of the duality of human conflict, the brilliance of strategy intertwined with the tragedy of lives extinguished in moments of perfect calculation. The fake retreat is remembered as a masterpiece of military planning, and as one of the most harrowing examples of how quickly war can consume the lives of thousands. Even as historians dissect the tactical genius behind the fake retreat at Saipan, the human dimension of the battle cannot be ignored. War, after all, is measured not only by territory gained or enemies defeated but by the lives forever altered in its wake. For the soldiers on both sides, the 18 minutes on that volcanic slope were life-changing, a crucible of fear, courage, and survival. Survivors like Private Kenji Sato spoke often of the disorientation and shock that followed. You could hear the screams, smell the smoke, and see men falling all around, he remembered decades later. But in the next instant, you had to move. You had no choice but to survive, or you were done. For the Americans, the cost was less in numbers but no less in memory. Corporal O'Reilly recalled how the quiet after the barrage felt heavier than the noise itself, the silence pressing down on men who had just witnessed the annihilation of thousands. These personal accounts provide perspective on the limits of strategy. A plan may succeed in the abstract, achieving objectives with near-perfect precision, but in reality, every victory carries the weight of grief, trauma, and moral ambiguity. Harrington's triumph was measured in tactical brilliance, yet he and his officers were not immune to the psychological burdens of orchestrating such devastation. Letters home, personal diaries, and post-war interviews reveal a lingering sense of solemnity, a recognition that war's efficiency does not absolve its cost. Saipan's volcanic ridges and scorched fields became a classroom in the duality of combat, the interplay between intellect and instinct, calculation and chaos, human ingenuity and human loss. It is here that the fake retreat becomes more than a historical footnote, it becomes a lens through which we can examine the complex realities of warfare. For modern military thinkers, the battle serves as both inspiration and warning. It demonstrates how preparation, coordination, and psychological insight can yield decisive results. But it also serves as a reminder that behind every strategic maneuver are lives at stake, that behind every calculated firestorm are men who bleed, scream, and die. Understanding Saipan fully requires balancing admiration for tactical skill with reverence for the human cost, a lesson that resonates long after the smoke clears. By the days following the 18-minute massacre, the momentum of the battle had decisively shifted. With the 43rd Division effectively annihilated, Japanese defensive lines across Saipan began to crumble. Hills once defended with ruthless discipline were now lightly held or abandoned entirely. The remaining soldiers, traumatized and demoralized, were forced into desperate last stands or chaotic retreats, unable to mount any coordinated counterattack. American forces pressed their advantage. Infantry units, supported by artillery and naval bombardment, moved swiftly, securing strategic positions and cutting off escape routes. The Japanese command structure, already weakened by the loss of officers and experienced troops in the fake retreat, struggled to reorganize. Communications broke down, orders went unheeded, and scattered resistance became increasingly ineffective. Captain Tanaka, one of the few surviving officers, attempted to rally what remained of his men. But morale had shattered. The psychological blow of losing nearly 3,000 comrades in minutes had left indelible scars. Desperate skirmishes erupted in small pockets, often with minimal coordination, but the overall resistance on the island was no longer cohesive. The Americans now held both the high ground and the initiative, a decisive advantage that would lead to Saipan's eventual capture. The success of the fake retreat demonstrated more than battlefield cunning. It had directly shortened the campaign, saving American lives in the long run by preempting prolonged frontal assaults against entrenched Japanese positions. The island's fall marked a turning point in the Pacific theater, providing a critical base for subsequent operations, including the strategic bombing of the Japanese home islands. Yet even in victory, the reality of war remained stark. The once lush island was now scarred by craters, burned vegetation, and the remnants of shattered fortifications. Survivors on both sides carried the emotional weight of what had transpired, understanding that Saipan had become a grim symbol of war's relentless efficiency and devastating cost. The 18-minute battle had accomplished its tactical goal, but it also left a haunting legacy. It was a reminder that, in warfare, brilliance and horror are often inseparable, and that the line between strategy and human tragedy can be measured in minutes, sometimes even seconds. The fake retreat at Saipan stands today not only as a dramatic episode of the Pacific War but also as a defining example of the evolution of modern warfare. Military historians regard the operation as a perfect case study in the integration of deception, firepower, and psychological manipulation, a combination that would influence Allied tactics throughout the remainder of World War II. From a strategic perspective, the ambush demonstrated the power of preemptive planning and precise execution. The American forces had turned intelligence into action, predicting enemy behavior and exploiting it with devastating accuracy. By engineering an environment where Japanese instincts, to advance against perceived weakness, became fatal, Harrington and his officers showcased a sophisticated understanding of human psychology as a tool of war. Moreover, the battle highlighted the advantages of combined arms tactics. Artillery, infantry, and naval gunfire were synchronized in a way that magnified the lethality of each element. This coordination not only maximized casualties among the Japanese troops but also minimized American exposure to direct assault. The 18-minute massacre exemplified the potential of integrated operations, influencing subsequent amphibious campaigns in the Pacific, including the assaults on Tinian, Guam, and Iwo Jima. Beyond its immediate tactical and operational impact, the engagement had profound moral and philosophical implications. The deliberate orchestration of mass destruction forced commanders and soldiers alike to confront the human cost of strategy. It posed uncomfortable questions about the nature of calculated killing, the responsibility of leadership, and the thin line separating genius from tragedy in warfare. For future generations of military leaders, the fake retreat became a lesson in the potency of deception and foresight, but also a cautionary tale about the ethics of mass casualties. Military academies studied the operation not merely for its success but to understand the complexity of applying strategic brilliance without losing sight of human consequences. Ultimately, the legacy of Saipan is twofold: it marks a triumph of tactical acumen and operational planning, and it preserves the memory of the lives expended in the pursuit of victory. The 18-minute massacre remains a stark reminder that in war, the speed and precision of decisions can change the fate of thousands in an instant, leaving behind a legacy that is as haunting as it is instructive. As the sun set over Saipan, casting long shadows across the cratered terrain, the island bore silent witness to the consequences of that fateful day. The fake retreat had achieved its objective with ruthless efficiency. 2,800 Japanese soldiers were gone, an entire regiment erased in just 18 minutes. Yet the echoes of the battle lingered long after the guns fell silent, in the memories of survivors, in the scarred landscape, and in the lessons carried forward by future generations of military strategists. The 18-minute massacre serves as a stark reminder of both the brilliance and the horror inherent in warfare. It illustrates how meticulous planning, coordination, and understanding of the enemy can create decisive results, but also how strategy and human life are inexorably entwined, and how victory is measured not just in territory or enemy casualties, but in the lives irreversibly changed by violence. For the soldiers who fought and survived, the memories of that day remained vivid and haunting. For historians, the fake retreat became a pivotal study in tactics and psychology, influencing military doctrine long after the Pacific War ended. And for the world, Saipan stands as a testament to the duality of human ingenuity, capable of both remarkable precision and unfathomable destruction. When we remember Saipan, we remember the courage, the calculation, and the cost. The 18-minute battle that erased thousands reminds us that history is shaped in moments, and that even the briefest span of time can carry consequences that echo through generations. The fake retreat at Saipan is more than a story of war, it is a story of strategy, humanity, and the enduring impact of one of the most harrowing and tactically brilliant engagements of World War II.